Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today, believe it or not, is the 5th birthday of our friend, the PlayStation 4. So, a couple of things. First, I know that's something I say every year with these type of videos, is just like the shock of the year, but I mean, 5 years, man. Like, I had the same type of reaction when it came to the Wii U's 5th birthday last year. So if you're not familiar, every year, it's kind of become a tradition, really, that I do, at least since the first anniversary of these consoles, that I would do a video basically kind of recapping what the year had been like, my thoughts on it, some future predictions, that kind of stuff. Just kind of generally just have a conversation about it. And, yeah, obviously I wanted to do that this year. Now, historically speaking, I've always done the PS4, the Wii U, and the Xbox One in that order because on a calendar, in the order, that's when they came out. I mean, I know not the years, but the days of the week, the 15th, 18th, and 22nd, respectively. However, I'm going to be just upfront with you guys. We're not doing a video on the Wii U this year. There's no point. Even last year when I did it, I kind of eked that one out. I enjoyed making it, don't get me wrong, but like there wasn't that much content to discuss. And then the comment section was full of a lot of people being like, there was no reason to make this video. So yeah, this year you'd be even more right, because all that really happened with the Wii U is Nintendo shut down some servers, Just Dance 2019 came out, and Limited Run Games announced that they're doing a single game for the Wii U. Other than that, I mean, you just saw it. That's the Wii U video. There's not much else to say. Its legacy lives on, probably in the Switch video, but not so much in this one. So, RIP Wii U. But let's focus here. Let's talk about the PlayStation 4 on its 5th birthday. Again, that's if you're watching this the day it came out. Now, the PS4 is a juggernaut of massive success, and that comes with some pros and cons. Obviously good for Sony, they're kicking ass with that, and I wish them well, and they're delivering some great gaming experiences on this platform. In particular here, I have the PS4 Pro, also have the stock PS4, the one I got originally. There's also a PS4 Slim. I do not have that particular model, but it does exist, so you have plenty of holiday buying options if you want to buy it this year. And I'm sure a lot of you will, because there will be a big price cut this year, and Sony is continuing to make this their focal point of not only as a company, but also just in video games in general. But this year for them has, despite all of the success that has come from it, if you kind of look back on it, it was kind of a very calm year. And what I mean by that is, when you're a console company, or a company that makes consoles, let me rephrase it that way, and you're losing, you tend to do a lot more shaky things. History is littered with consoles doing stuff like that. When they're not winning something, they come up with zany ideas to try and, you know, get people to pay attention to what they're doing. Whereas the guys who are in front typically try not to fuck with that success. They just kind of go like, we're working, so just keep going, keep it easy, don't do anything that, you know, we're not making any mistakes, so don't mess it up. And that there is a logic to that, because if you've kind of addressed all the issues people have, then there's not much else to fix. And we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. But so what that means is companies like Microsoft, for example, are trying left and right with all these crazy, zany ideas, some of which are really, really awesome, but they're doing exciting things to talk about, mostly because they're losing. Nintendo, on the other hand, I mean, they're not so much losing anymore, but definitely because their situation's a little different, but they're also trying a lot of different things for that reason, especially coming off the back of the Wii U. Sony didn't really need to do that, because they've already been wildly successful this year, and their whole attitude has been just kind of keep going. I mean, if you look at their E3 conference this year, that was kind of what it was. It was, hey, look, you know, we're gonna keep doing what we're doing, we got some cool games coming out, enjoy. Like, that's pretty much all it's been. And that's not a bad thing. It's just they're just not messing with that success. And they're right to do that, because we'll talk about some milestones, but they've been very successful there. However, there have been some changes in that regard. And so I want to talk about those, but granted, they're kind of few and far between. The first one that comes to mind is Sony finally got on board with the whole cross-link play system, basically the ability to play multi-platform connections. So if you have a game for, say, Xbox, you know, you could now play it on people who have play multiplayer with people who are gaming on PC. Microsoft introduced that concept originally. For years, that was not a thing. You couldn't really do that with very rare special cases. I mean, yes, there are a couple out there, but for the most part, that wasn't even close to an industry standard. Microsoft essentially went, we're losing, this will spark interest in Xbox potentially, because PC is a whole nother realm and maybe we can get those guys to work together. Plus PC's kind of their own entity. So they got that happening and that was exciting. Sony, of course, wanted nothing to do with that. Nintendo originally didn't really want anything to do with that until Microsoft apparently approached them about it. And Nintendo, you have to remember, coming off the back of the Wii U, when you're in the position of a company that's losing, you will make some different changes. You will come up with ideas that go, wouldn't I used to think to do that, but now, okay. So the Nintendo Switch now supports cross-play with things like Rocket League, where you can play against Xbox One gamers and PC gamers, which is crazy to think that Nintendo would ever have cooperated. But again, there's a reason for it. They were losing. So that just left Sony the odd man out. Now I saw Sony's position on this. It's pretty logical, actually, when you think about it. It was like, we're winning. Why are we going to stop, Joe over there who has an Xbox One? We want him to buy a PS4. If all of his friends have PS4s and they're all playing online, we need Joe to buy a PS4. We don't want him to keep his Xbox One. But the other consequence of that was they started to look like assholes. They looked like the only guys who weren't willing to cooperate. And that was just pissing people off. So they eventually had to cave. And now, as a result, Fortnite will be the first, if it's not already available. I'm sorry, I don't play Fortnite. The first one that actually allows for complete crossplay between all of these different platforms. So PS4 gamers can play with Switch gamers, can play with PC gamers, can play with Xbox gamers, all in the same lobby, at least in theory. And so you got to give them credit for finally getting around to that. So that was one major ecosystem change. The other one that I noticed, again, it was not an extreme year for these kinds of changes, is they finally are going to start allowing people to change their usernames. And if we're all the way down to that point, there's an argument that can be made that Sony has just been that good at this, that they don't need to make changes, but more specifically with the usernames thing. And I understood this one. Because when I first got a PS3, when it first came out back in 2006, I put in my old high school type of username, the name I would have thought was cool at the time. Well, I'm 31 now. I don't want that username anymore. I want to change it to something different. And I could not do that. Now, apparently, you will be able to, so that's fantastic. But if we're all the way down to the point where that, I always wanted that, yes, I wanted to change my name, but it was never, something I would have sat here and made, a whole video talking about, oh, damn it, Sony, you need to do, that would never have crossed my mind, because it's just not that important. Because they've addressed all the other things I really thought were important, things like external hard drive support and all that type of stuff. So you can argue that that's a measurement of huge success, is that they are all the way down to the point where that's the kind of stuff they're dealing with. But at the same time, the other consequence of that is there's not as much to acknowledge when it comes to their year. There's just not as much to say when it comes to changes. That's really the two things that I could even think of that they did this year. We're going to talk about games in a bit here, because that also was a good thing for them. You know what, screw it. Let's talk about the games right now, and then we'll talk about milestones. So as far as gaming goes, obviously we all had great PS4 experiences this year if you had a PS4. There was a lot of content offered to us through multiple different titles, but we have to understand that most of the games that came out this year, as is tradition, but this year in particular, most of them were third-party content. Sure, we could sit here and talk about Far Cry 5 and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, but why? Everyone had access to that. We could all sit here and talk about PUBG and Fortnite and all that kind of stuff, but again, everyone had access to them. Whereas, what did Sony bring to the table exclusively for their platform that made you go, all right, I need a PS4? And this year, that was kind of limited. Now, they had some big hitters, but just a small amount. You had things like God of War, which was pretty cool. You had Marvel's Spider-Man, R.I.P. Stan Lee, which was also a very cool game. Sega showed a lot of support with the Yakuza series, getting Yakuza Kiwami 1 and 2, Yakuza 6 out there. Sega also put out Fist of the North Star. So you got some serious exclusive content, third-party love from Sega there. Also things like Detroit Become Human were big hitters for them, or at least exclusive content that drew some people to the platform. But outside of that, it wasn't that successful, because a lot of the stuff they also wanted to bring out, which you thought would be, things like Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, eventually got ported over to Xbox One and PS4 and Switch. So as far as exclusive content goes, Sony, I would give them the middle of the road vote on that. They get a B. And if your measurement stick is the other two, Microsoft comes in last with a C of the three, and Nintendo is Nintendo. They're always going to get an A on that, because that's their whole game. No pun intended. That's what they do. So none of that is that surprising. I mean, that's really all they had to kind of go on to rock the boat, was exciting gaming experiences. And they did deliver quite a few. It's just they didn't deliver enough that I think that most people would be driven to get a PS4 just for those games. Now, I'm not saying nobody bought a PS4 for God of War, of course, because they certainly did. I just would have liked to have seen more stuff like that, or at least retain some of the content that made your platform exciting and exclusive. And I realize the argument of that. A lot of people hate exclusive content because as a gamer, you should fundamentally dislike the concept because it's cutting you off from a certain library of games simply by virtue of the fact that you don't own that platform. But it's a necessary evil in the gaming economics because if every platform had every single game exactly the same, there's no reason to pick one over the other. There's no reason for multiple platforms to even exist at that point. Exclusives drive sales to a particular console over another. That's historically how it works, and logically and economically so. I get the hate against it, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily right for the economy of the gaming industry. Now that said, Sony only really did a few. Now they had others that were smaller exclusives, but I'm talking about your big AAA like exclusives they retained. That was kind of it, but they did deliver solid experiences, so you got to give them definite props for that. And they knew when to use them because they had like a God of War edition console, they had a Spider-Man edition console, etc. So I think there was a bundle that included Detroit Become Human as well. So they knew which ones to market that way. So good for them. Now, they obviously also saw massive success with this because as far as milestones go, they also did really well this year. They hit 2. Now the first that was pretty exciting was they hit the 500 millionth PlayStation 4, or 500 millionth PlayStation sold. Now that was a point of some contention and confusion earlier this year, particularly in a very sad place I call the YouTube comments section. All present company, of course, accepted. But if you went around the time when that platform was announced, that release of the PlayStation 4, and you saw really anybody talking about it, you would see some very sad comments from people being like, dude, PlayStation 4 is killing it so bad they've already sold 500 million PlayStation 4s. No. 500 million was to hit the mark of all collective PlayStation sales. That included PS1, PS2, PS3, PS4, PS Vita, PSP. Altogether, the PlayStation entity, the brand, reached 500 million units. They knew that was coming, so they decided to market with that really cool console they put out, that PS4 Pro that's like blue. Now, that's awesome. Congratulations to them on their success. And what's interesting about that is they're only bested by Nintendo when it comes to amount of units sold. Now, to be fair though, I'm throwing this out there, Nintendo only beats them by virtue of the fact that you're including Nintendo's handhelds, of course the Game Boys, the DSs, all that stuff. Now, that makes sense. We're including the Vita, we're including the PSP in that. But if you take handhelds out of the equation, man, just for the record, the PlayStation is the highest selling console brand of all time. I mean, Nintendo doesn't even reach by half, basically. If you combine the PS1, the PS2, and the PS3 and PS4 sales, excluding the handhelds, and then you just combine, you know, the NES, SNES, N64, GameCube, Wii U, and Switch, surprisingly, Nintendo is just maybe above the halfway point on that. Now granted, Switch could obviously screw that up, and you know, Switch is still selling very, very well, so that will change over time, but I mean, that right there, to be honest with you, is really impressive. And the other milestone they hit, which was expected, but was also just kind of like, wow, really? Already? Okay. The PS4 has now surpassed the collective sales, the lifetime sales of the PlayStation 3. Now the PS3 was Sony's worst selling home console. That's not really surprising at around, I think, 83 million units, which is still, I mean, when that's your worst selling platform, I mean, Nintendo's worst selling platform was the Wii U at 13 million. That's a big difference. But for them to have surpassed that in only 5 years is impressive because the PS3 was Sony's dominant platform from 2006 until 2013, and it continued to sell platforms after that. I mean, technically it's still out there. Granted, it's a lot less relevant. Although this is, I think, the first year where they didn't release anything for the PS3 at all. I mean, even Just Dance didn't bother with a PS3 version. But basically my point is the PS3 went on for a very long time and collectively sold about 83 million units. And the PS4 surpassed that in just 5 years. So it still has, theoretically, 1 to 2 more years of dominant lifetime where it can, you know, continue and possibly catch up to the PS1, which would be the next one after it. Maybe, we'll see as time goes on, but congratulations to them on that milestone. That's very impressive. So, now that we've kind of talked a little bit about what the last year has been like, let's talk a little bit about that future. What can we see happening? Well, To be honest with you, I kind of feel like we have two different discussions here. We can have what is the PS4 going to be like this upcoming year, and then maybe kind of beyond that. So I'm going to talk a little bit basically about what's beyond that before we talk about the year in itself. I think obviously we're starting to gear up for the next generation of platforms. Now, I have been very much on the record, and I now amend all of these statements because I believe I was wrong, that the last generation of consoles was going to be this one in the most traditional of sense. And what I meant by that was I thought it would be the last physical media generation. I was kind of right up into a point because we still don't know. I mean, I said that I thought maybe, I said this a few years ago, but I thought whatever Nintendo released after the Wii U might be the last traditional home game console, which was the Switch. And to this point in time, that's accurate. But I now believe, even though Microsoft is very openly talking about their next platform and their next thing that they're going to do, we still don't know if it's going to use physical media or not. If it doesn't, then I don't really consider that a home console, because that to me is a huge part of what defines a console, is the ability to use physical games on it. Obviously, that's disputable. But I, for the longest time, also believed Sony was going to go that route. I no longer do. And the thing that changed my mind on that was, having gone to Japan a couple of times, I understand that their culture better than I did before I'd ever seen it, which makes logical sense. And when it comes to Japan, they like their physical media. And it's not that they couldn't handle, like, you know, from a technological standpoint, the ability to have online-only content or streaming content, etc. But I do feel that just from a social standpoint, Japan's not quite ready to give up physical media. So I think Sony, a Japanese company, is not going to want to release an all-digital box in Japan. So it would not surprise me at all if the PS5 is a physical media-based console. But don't ignore the possibility you might see two versions. We might see an all-digital version for North America and Europe, where we see a physical edition in Japan only that gets physical copies in Japan. That's pure speculation time. Let's be very fair about that. But that would be something. So we'll see how that plays out. But I kind of feel like, yeah, Sony's probably going to cling on to physical media for one more generation. Hopefully they'll come up with the next generation of Blu-ray disc or next high-definition disc format, because as it is, games are far too big to fit on the current level of physical media discs. I had read reports that Sony had been working on this 300 gigabyte disc for a while. We'll see if that's actually true, if it ever pans out, because that would be kind of necessary at this point. Because, I mean, you know, you'll see games where Fallout 76 is a perfect example. The Blu-ray disc it comes on is like a 45 gigabyte disc, but it has a day one 51 gigabyte patch. The patch is bigger than the disk's capacity, which already has data on it, which is insane. Which is why I'm glad Sony did things like adding external hard drive support, which, you know, other companies had done, because it's just necessary in this day and age. As far as PS5 goes, one thing that really excites me is this possibility of physical backwards compatibility. Again, that would be dependent upon the idea that the console actually uses physical media, but that's a rumor that's been floating around for a while, and I'm of two minds on this. Obviously, as the retro gamer, I look at this and I go, that would be incredible, because I have my PS1 games, I have my PS2, my PS3, my PS4, and I would love the ability to use them physically. I think there are arguments to be made in favor of this, in that we're in the nostalgia generation. You know, things like the Nintendo Classic, SNES Classic, even Sony thrown in their hat with the PlayStation Classic, have proven there is a market for this type of thing. And Sony, as I mentioned before, through all the sales they've had, has this giant catalog to work with. But as awesome as that would all be, as awesome as the idea would be that they could actually sit there and build it all in, and you could just have that, I think that would be great from a marketing standpoint, the ability for Sony to come out and say, PS5, it plays everything PlayStation. Probably not PSP or Vita, but everything else. I think that would be a really huge selling point on paper. The problem is when it comes into practice, because while I actually, regardless of all of this backwards compatibility status, I do think PS5, if it's physical, will be PS4 compatible. The other three is highly debatable, but PS4 I think is pretty expected. But when it comes to backwards compatibility, you kind of have to give it to Microsoft for being the guys who kind of reinvigorated the concept of that by throwing it out there with 360 backwards compatibility, as well as even OG Xbox backwards compatibility. Granted, the OG Xbox library has been very small so far and may not even expand, but it does technically exist. And while that's awesome, if you look at the numbers of how many people are actually playing games that way, it's sadly very small. 360 doing better than OG Xbox, not surprisingly, but even 360's numbers are very unimpressive for the amount of people who are actually sitting there and playing games that way. There are certain exceptions to that, certain games, but for the most part, most people just aren't bothering. Because what happens is most people go, oh yeah, backwards compatibility, that's an awesome idea, I want that. Much like myself, people just get excited about it. How much do they practically use it? Not a whole lot. They'll put the game in perhaps in their Xbox One X, see what it looks like running in 4K. It's so cool to see Halo Reach running that way, or it's so cool to see Conker's Bad Fur Day, not the N64 version, but the original Xbox version, Conker Live and Reloaded, seeing that run on Xbox One X in 4K. It looks amazing, and then you'll tinker with it for a second. I remember that. Anyway, let's move on. Let's play Assassin's Creed Odyssey, or whatever is more relevant. That's the sad state of it. So would Sony care? Would they bother? Because there's not necessarily any actual money in that. It's purely a marketing move. Now, Microsoft continues to do it, so there's something to that. But again, Microsoft is losing. They need to do things to excite you. Sony doesn't need to do that, which is why they have not introduced the same concept, even though they could. They're reselling digital versions, particularly of PlayStation 2 titles. There's really nothing in the PlayStation 2 that prevents it from being able to detect the disc of the digital versions they've got and do it exactly the way the Xbox One does. But they choose not to because they'd rather have you pay for it. And I've never seen their numbers on how well that's working, but I don't know. So we'll see. It kind of depends on what Sony thinks Microsoft is going to do next time, and because that's their immediate competition. If they're afraid of Microsoft winning, then they have to kind of adjust accordingly. So we'll see how that plays out for them. But as far as things playing out in the more immediate future, for the year 2019, I think that the PS4 is going to be very similar to what it was for this last year. I think this probably will be the last, if not maybe second to last, it might be 2020, where it's the last year where that's Sony's primary focus is this console. Because unlike Microsoft, who's been really out there talking about all their plans, about all these things they're doing to excite people and how we're going to bring this to the next generation, Sony has been very quiet about all this. And there is a reason for that. While they could be working on this stuff in secret, they don't want to go out there and say, we're working on PS5 and here's all the details, because it would slow down the success of the PS4, and they need it to continue to be successful. So they've been kind of mum on the whole thing. So I think that this year will be kind of basically the same. Maybe towards the tail end, you might start seeing more rumors and more conversation about PS5. We don't know yet, obviously. But I think in the meantime, you're just going to kind of see the more continued rollout of a couple of big exclusive games while seeing just more solid third-party gaming experiences. I think the PS5 or PS4 in 2019 will still be a very good gaming experience platform with a lot of solid stuff on it. But the dominant console of the generation, as far as the best way to play those games, probably not. I mean, Xbox One X, probably objectively just a better way to play multiplats. You know, being able to run games in higher resolutions with over a better experience. But that's why you need the more exclusive content to drive people over to the Sony platform. So I hope that more of their titles get rolled out in that way, and I hope they retain more of those exclusives to continue with that success. But at the same time, these are the guys who have just surpassed the PS3's lifetime sales in only a few years. So they don't need my advice. So continue what you're doing, Sony. Continue to crush it and make some money and do well for yourselves. Hopefully you'll at least bring out some more worthwhile, exciting individual game experiences for just the dedicated PlayStation fan base. That would be awesome and much appreciated. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned. Next week I will be doing the Xbox One's video of the same nature. Again, there will not be a Wii U version, and the Switch version will come out like in March when its anniversary comes up. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.